Well, we are here at Bromley, and as I'm sure you know, they're making the news, not just for their exploits in the National League, but they are in the throes of appointing a new analyst here at Hayes Lane on the basis, not so much of their experience in professional football, but their experience on Football Manager, the game. It's a kind of, maybe a step in a new direction. Danny Jameson and Adam Virgo are here to discuss this development. Danny, you've got some expertise here. You've played it a lot, Football Manager. You also worked on it. And of course, you're now very much a broadcaster that works on the game. So you've got an ideal position to tell us whether this is a good thing or a mad move.
Well, I don't think it can hurt. As you say, I did work on the game a few years ago as one of their researchers, and I can state from experience that a lot of work goes into it. Even the makers, Sports Interactive, have very regular contact with people who work at football clubs. They go in to talk to managers and executives from up and down the leagues. Been in at Brighton very recently to know what goes on behind the scenes. So I certainly don't think it can hurt. And we're always after news perspectives in the game, I suppose. So what's the harm in doing it this way? There's the sell.
Here comes Virgs off his long run to tell us why it's a ridiculous idea. Go on, son.
Well, the game's not played on stats, is it?
No. Well, is it not? Is it prepared on stats? I mean, stats are ever part of it, aren't they?
Listen, I agree. I agree with Danny. I think it's a step in the right direction. Danny mentions Brighton, who I'm, where I'm from, and the research that's gone into there is incredible now. Whereas once upon a time, it's just who could kick the ball the furthest. And now all of a sudden you're seeing all different areas of the game that they can look at. I think it's a great idea because, as you've seen with someone like Josh Stokes, you've gone and found somebody in the lower leagues. All that information may not be heavily dependent like they get in the Premier League, but I'm sure there are rough diamonds out there on these stats that they can find on these players that they can bring into the football club and be ready-made to kind of fit into a model that they look at, the way that they play, the players that are playing in those situations. So I do see it as a massive positive.
Yeah. I don't know what your experience was as a player. You obviously played it before you worked on it, Dan. Did you find any Adam Virgos in the long grass?
Well, I mean, Adam Virgos are very rare. Let's just put it that way. But
all be grateful for that.
But as one of the researchers, you have to know the club that you're working on from back to front. So the data that's being put into the game is done by people who know what they're talking about, who watch these players on a regular basis. There's loads of stories. I mean, Alex McLeish tells of his son told him to sign some young lad who was tearing it up in the Barcelona youth system, and that turned out to be Lionel Messi.
Yeah.
There's a lot of lots of players. Rooney Bargi, who's scored for Copenhagen in the Champions League, is another one who's been making waves on the game. So there's certainly ways that it can be used in terms of helping football in the real world.
Yeah. There's no doubt stats are an increasing part of the way football analyses future prospects, but also the way it runs the squad that's already here.
Yeah, it's a massive development even towards the back-end tenure of my, a lot of your fitness stats and the way that they work now. I mean, you look at someone like Erik ten Hag, I think hoiling a player because he hasn't had the minutes pre-season and he's bringing them off halfway through the game, etc. The fans get frustrated, but all he's going off is the data and the stats. And I think that's the only time sometimes when a player can just say, I'm okay to carry on and things like that, where sometimes the stats can get in the way sometimes. But I know managers have used this before, like nameless, but I know managers have gone to Football Manager and seen players that have kind of done well and used stats off that. Not officially, but I know certain managers have used the game in the past.
Yeah, and the fact is, of course, if whoever this person is that joins here at Bromley, if it works, if they feel it's an addition that's valuable, it'll take off, won't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's a copycat sport, right? Yeah. Everybody that does something new, I remember not too long ago, something like a set-piece coach was new and exciting. Now everybody has one. I remember Thomas Gronemark, when he came into Liverpool, was a throwing coach and everybody scoffed at it, but then suddenly the throwing started getting better. Everybody wants a throwing coach. It's going to be exactly the same thing here, where if it's a success for Bromley, every club in the division is going to be looking at exactly the same thing.
On the other hand, does that person arrive here with a lot of scepticism from first-team players, from backroom staff who'll say, well, hang on, what have you done to earn your place among us?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that they're going to have is the trust with him and the manager, because I know Andy, as well as he's doing this season, I do think he sometimes comes from an old school mentality that you've got to try and wing that over. And the fact that he's allowed this to happen, I think is the first step. Now, the next step is if this person comes along and said, I found 2 or 3 players, it's almost like sometimes giving a tip as a horse sometimes. You think it's either going to work or it's not going to work. So if he finds the right players, and what they've done really well is find good youngsters here. and that's what they've done really, really well. And they've progressed them on throughout the team, really. So I think that's the biggest question that you're going to have, is how much can Andy trust the stats and everything that's going forwards to then bring players in, because you don't have a big budget where you can make too many mistakes.
Yeah.
And that's going to be a really interesting concept.
But it'll also be a learning curve for the new arrival, won't it? They're going to have to find out about, I guess, things that Football Manager, as try as it does, can never prepare you for. The kind of moaning that you would have got up to in the dressing room, the kind of stuff that happens at home that comes to the training ground, the poorly kid, the car crash on the way to work, whatever it might be.
Yeah, listen, and that's where, Brentford have used it for a long time, and I know there's a small period during their tenure where it wasn't working, and that got heavily criticised, where stats was being more used than someone coming to watch a game of football and getting a feel for a person. Because then all of a sudden you throw the stats into the system and he's not what you think, and all of a sudden you've got an argument with me and with Danny saying, well, I think he's a good player, and you're saying, well, no, the stats are coming back at this. So I think at this level it could cause a little bit more confusion, where at the top level there's so much stats available, data, the amount they run and everything, but I think at this level it can still be a learning curve.
What was your greatest achievement? Did you win the Champions League with your beloved Wigan?
Yeah, I always end up getting to a stage where I try and do it with only British and Irish players, and then only sign homegrown, and then just about manage it. I think it took about 12 years or something, but finally got there in the end with Wigan. So I'd say that's not
Wigan
too bad.
European champions. That's where Football Manager differs from the real world. Did you ever get your...
It cost me my GCSEs. That
Did
was
it?
Oh, massively. My mum and dad never found that out, why my grades were so bad, but Football Manager was for a main reason, and because of that. And what always used to annoy me, you get to like February time and someone scores their first goal of the season against you. That always used to annoy me.
There'll be one or two people watching not absolutely sure that it was that cost Fergus his GCSEs, but if you could manage anyone? I mean, obviously Wigan.
Yeah,
but
apart from Wigan.
I
always like the interesting challenge of someone like Athletic Bilbao, who can only sign Basque players, which is a very interesting one, where it really challenges you to try and be better tactically, not just buying all the best players.
Are you the new De Zerbi?
I tried to be. I've had a good season with PSG the last...
Have you?
Yeah.
Easy
I know.
Easy mode.
I went 2 seasons, only lost 1 game, but I kept getting knocked out in the last 16 of the Champions League, so
Very realistic.
the fans
Again,
weren't happy. So yeah,
somewhat
it is very
akin to
realistic.
real life.
Yeah.
Well, listen, we will all watch with serious interest as to what unfolds here at Hayes Lane with Bromley's new addition.